Hello, everyone. Welcome to the state of Kentucky, our live show at noon on Fridays. Whether you're watching us live or if you're watching us later on the recorded session, we're glad to have you with us. We have a great show today. We have Representative Joni Jenkins, who's going to talk to us in a minute about the budget. And we have Amy McGrath talking to us about how campaigning is going during the coronavirus pandemic. And finally, we have Dr. Becky Dutch from UK College of Medicine to tell us why we are having so much trouble getting testing for coronavirus. We are very fortunate that we have the capabilities, the technology and stuff to do this show, and we hope that you enjoy it. If you do, share it with your friends and let us know that you've enjoyed it. Two of the parts today are pre-recorded, but this first section with Representative Jenkins is live. And so what I want to be sure you know is that if you comment on Facebook or YouTube, we can see those comments and we might even share them in the show. And especially if you have questions for Representative Jenkins or for me, be sure to put those up there and we'll be glad to answer them. So let's bring on Representative Jenkins. She has had a little bit of a camera problem here, so all we have is voice. But we are really glad to have her with us. Welcome, Representative Jenkins, to the state of Kentucky.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
So I'm just fascinated with the whole thing that went down the last 10 days in the legislature. And before we get to talking about the budget, which was the main thing I wanted to talk about today, let's talk about the voting process. I mean, there were pictures of representatives voting from their cars, and there were people with masks and all sorts of things going on. Tell us how that came about and if you're going to keep doing it.
Well, it happened very quickly. My caucus had been asking for remote voting for at least 2 weeks from the time that the shelter in place talk started. And it was not received with a whole lot of enthusiasm, or folks felt like a need. And then weekend before last, we had a staff person, somebody who worked on the education committee, test positive. Right. That employee is doing fine. They've been treated at home the entire time, but it seemed like either that was a coincidence, but that was when everything started changing. And I began talking almost daily with Speaker Osborne about what things we could do. My staff prepared a memo, and when we sat down, my days are all out of whack now. I guess Tuesday or Monday or Tuesday when I was in Frankfurt, we sat down and we were thinking along the same lines that it would be constitutionally okay for folks to vote remotely. And it was decided that they needed to be on campus and that they would come in Wednesday and vote present. And we would do that in shifts. So we would have no more than about 20 folks in the chamber.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, they came in and voted present. And that vote was to indicate their presence and to vote to suspend the rules to allow the remote voting. Then they went back to their offices. Some went to their cars because they felt that was safer, and that was fine. And then they communicated to me and the other leaders via text how they were going to, as we went through the voting. So it was a long process, but it worked fine. It worked fine. And the rule that we passed is very broad, and it was by design because when we're due to come back on the 13th, we're not sure what Kentucky will look like at that point. We're not sure what will happen. So there is the, no pun intended, remote possibility that folks may be voting from home that day.
Wow. Yeah. Were they watching the session on KET and that's how they were keeping up with it?
Right. They were watching on KET.
Okay.
And keeping up with it. And, I understand the need for it, and I'm glad we did it. I think I've worried for weeks that we were not modeling good practices for the rest of the Kentucky. Here we were telling the rest of Kentucky, social distancing, closing businesses left and right. And here we were being seen every day on KET, business as usual. So, but it did, and maybe because it was new and people were trying to figure it all out. We passed a, $48 billion budget with very little questions. And that's concerning. But we also know this budget probably is not going to be the same budget. There's a huge possibility that we will either be back in special session, and certainly in January, we'll have to do some revisions to current year budget at that point, because there was just no way to predict what our revenues are going to be from here on out.
So let's talk about the budget then. Obviously, there was conference committee. There was the governor's budget, there was the House budget, then there was the Senate budget. And of course, the Senate budget came after the coronavirus pandemic became much more concerning. And the final budget was described by some people as austere and by other people as bare bones. So before we get to any concerns, what's good in it? Is there anything good in the budget as it was passed in your eyes?
Certainly, and I think you do have to view it now through the lens of where we are now. It is almost a continuation budget. Public education funding and higher education funding is held at the same as current year. We were able to do some things like fund what used to be the poison control line, but has become now the poison control and COVID-19 line.
Right.
We were able to put some extra money into that. There is, because the federal government upped their portion of Medicaid retro to January, we had about a $250 million savings in that. So that was kept in that budget, and there's flexibility within that cabinet for the governor to move some money around. We know more people are going to qualify for Medicaid with so many people losing their jobs. So there are some good things in this budget, but I think at the point that we are at with unemployment just skyrocketing almost overnight, one of our big concerns was passing something just to keep government going. If I think that was the big threat for us is, oh my gosh, what if we can't get a budget passed and government has to shut down on July 1st, right? Maybe, hopefully coming out of this crisis. So, there were some things that I was concerned about, and I addressed those on the floor. Let's
talk about those. I know you gave a floor speech with some concerns. What were they?
Well, some of the concerns were the not giving the governor the amount of flexibility across cabinets that I think in a time of crisis he may need. Who knows what we're going to need in healthcare, what we're going to need in workforce development, and those type of things. There was a cut of $500,000 out of the governor's office, and at a time when, I think he needed more flexibility. I would have liked for us to have a little bit more padding over there in the Medicaid budget. There are some things in there that shift authority from the governor's office to the attorney general's office, and I see those as purely political moves.
Right.
And those things are a little concerning. Now, of course, there's still the opportunity for the governor to look over it carefully and perhaps veto some things out of it. One of the good things, which is a good thing, but we're going to have to figure this out, is we froze the quasis pension contributions again, which could have some effect on our debt service and our bonding ability. But so, this is not the time for health departments to go broke.
No. What about revenue? I was surprised that in the midst of this, and I understand the hesitancy to talk about raising taxes or fees or doing anything when the economy is going down like that. But is there any discussion about how to deal with the revenue side?
Well, I was very disappointed in the revenue bill that was House Bill 351, which when it left the House was not sufficient in the amount of revenue. And of course, it was a very different time. But one of the really easy revenue increasers that you have, we had a tax on vaping equipment and a small increase in tobacco tax. And as you know, those are kind of regressive in the fact that you hope that they go, the output goes down because people stop using those products. But the Senate took out the increase for tobacco products. And that seemed so unreasonable that's, when we're having a respiratory virus, every incentive we give people to not smoke or not vape would seem to be a good thing. So I ended up voting against the revenue bill. I voted for it on the way out. And I was always very hesitant in all my career. I always thought if you didn't vote for the revenue, you ought to not be voting for the budget. And they kind of flipped this time. We voted for the budget first and then learned what was in the revenue package. One good thing in the revenue package is it does give the ability for the Secretary of State and the governor to decide to do other forms of voting, like mail-in voting. Both of them have to be on it, which I thought was a really good safeguard and good language.
We did a story on that this morning. I thought it was fascinating that they added one word and that made it possible.
Yeah, it seemed like such a big lift to ever go to that, and all you do is put other manners of voting. So that was a good thing in it, but I ended up voting against the revenue because I was pretty disappointed that and it may have just been about $8 million that we cut out of the revenue package, but it just seems silly to do it at this point.
It is becoming apparent, and I realize that I'm asking you something that you probably can't really answer, but it's becoming apparent that the coronavirus crisis is affecting the poor and the middle class much more than the wealthy, because most of the wealthy can work from home or they have enough savings or whatever the case may be. And we're talking about a lot of people in the middle class and lower who are living paycheck to paycheck. And one of my sons who has worked in food service said they were living shift to shift and tip to tip. Assuming that this does to the economy what we think it's going to do, do you think that the Republican majority might reconsider some of their tax cuts from the last couple of years and look to the better off people in Kentucky to help out?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I think certainly we have been able to see who it is that, number one, is helping to keep the economy going. The folks that work at grocery stores and food service, and the people who pick up our garbage, the frontline folks, and certainly all those folks from medical, all those that deal in healthcare, which you tend to think about doctors and nurses making pretty good salaries, but it's also the people that clean up the hospital, the CNAs that change bedpans. Everybody in that system has become so important now, and I would hope that as we go forward, that all people in positions of legislative authority would keep that in mind. The very people that we have denied a raise in minimum wage are the very people that are keeping our cities up and running right now.
Yes. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I had asked you?
Oh gosh, no. I think all of us across the aisle and across the two chambers have really been impressed with the job that Governor Andy Beshear is doing, and I think this has been kind of a uniting force. If there are any positives to find in this horrible, horrible situation, it does seem like this has united us. And in the House, our two leadership teams did work very hard to make sure that the last day when we were voting remotely, that things went as seamlessly as possible, and they listened to our concerns, and it turned out to be, I think, a pretty good day.
Yeah. I was impressed that you all worked that out. All right, Representative Joni Jenkins, the Democratic leader in the House. We appreciate your time, and we'll have you on again sometime. Thank you for being on the State of Kentucky.
Well, thank you very much. Everybody stay at home if you can.
Yep. Take care.
Take care.
That was Joni Jenkins, representative from Louisville, who is the head of the Democrats in the State House. We really appreciate her time being with us. We're going to do something now that we have not done before. Because of scheduling issues, we had to pre-record our next two segments. This system that we use is not really set up for pre-recording, so I'm having to do this sort of MacGyvering it, as somebody said earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and then play the segment. I won't be able to see what you are saying or doing, so if you do anything, it'll have to hold until I get out of the segment. So let me switch that in, and you see you get the wonderful parallax thing. So let me make that the full screen, and let me go over there and start the video, and we shall go from there. Well, I say we're going to go from there. Give me just a second. All right, we'll do it this way. Weeks we've been fortunate to have Charles Booker and Mike Royer both on the show. And today we are honored and privileged to have Amy McGrath joining us. She is the third member of the triumvirate running for the Democratic nomination to take on Mitch McConnell. So we are really happy to have her with us. Amy McGrath, welcome to the state of Kentucky.
Hey, Bruce, good to be here.
We are really glad to have you here, and I know you're busy, so we appreciate you taking the time. So normally when I interview candidates, the first question is always, how's the campaign going? But in today's time, it's how's the campaign going given everything? So how are things going?
Well, Bruce, look, the COVID-19 crisis is really real. It's changed how we have run this campaign. I think, my mission is still very clear, and that is to run a campaign and to ultimately defeat Senator Mitch McConnell. But with everything that's going on around us, I've restructured my campaign to help Kentuckians in need right now. I mean, I think you have to keep your eye on the ball, but at the same time, you can't be immune to everything that's going on. We have a lot of needs, and everybody needs to step up. So, one of the things that I did was I started an initiative called Commonwealth Common Health. And why? Well, because I have a large volunteer network. We have an organization already that we built. So, I'm a military officer. So when things change, when the environment changes, we have to adapt. We have to adapt quickly. So we did that. We moved our field organization and we adapted. And now we're using that field organization to help fellow Kentuckians in need, using our networks and also our fundraising operation to help with food banks around Kentucky. So, I mean, to answer your question, that's kind of what my focus is on right now.
When I was managing a team, I had a gentleman join the team who had just retired from the Army. And he used a term I had never heard before one day. He said, well, I've changed the way I'm approaching this project. I said, why? And he said, well, it's OBE. And I said, what is that? He said, overcome by events. Yeah. And I said, yeah, I think everybody's campaign right now is OBE for sure.
Yeah.
Well, in addition to the good work you're doing with the health fund and some other things, how are you actually campaigning? I mean, you can't do in-person events. You can't really do lit drops. I mean, if somebody did a lit drop on my door, I'd throw it away with a glove on. So, and even phone calls, do you want to have people doing that? So what are you doing to campaign? I assume it's mostly ads.
Well, some ads. But, I'm still talking to Kentuckians. I'm still getting out there and outreach. Just last night, I had a veterans council. I call it a veterans council, where we brought in some veterans to talk about the issues that are important to military families and veterans right now, but dealing with the COVID crisis, but also just in general. Last week I had a council that was just like this, a Zoom kind of thing that we're doing, that dealt with educators and teachers around Kentucky. What are the needs of public schools? What are the needs of educators? So I'm doing that. Every day I'm calling around, talking to local leaders, mayors, judge executives, trying to figure out, hey, how are you doing? What are your needs right now? How can we help? Just getting a sense for how things are going. So it's hard. There's no question. It's not as good as actually physically getting out there and going around Kentucky and talking to people. But we're doing what we need to do, given the constraints that we have right now.
Do you have any events planned of any kind with Booker and Broyer in terms of forums or debates or anything like that?
I know my staff is looking at, because we get requests all the time, so I know that one just came in this morning for a request from an event in Louisville. So we're certainly going to look at all that if there's a way to do those types of things. And I do interviews all the time, just like this.
Sure. So Charles Booker and Mike Broyer are both running to your left. They are positioning themselves as more progressive than you, and obviously my site makes no bones about being progressive. So we have a lot of readers who would call themselves progressive. So what do you say to those voters who call themselves progressive as to why they should vote for you?
Well, I just think it's about the fact that we need a new generation of leaders in Washington. We need a new generation of leaders who are not bought off by special interests. We need people who, in my opinion, who have proven that they can put their country and Kentucky above their political party and do what's right for Kentucky. So, to me, I am so many Americans, I am tired of being put in a box of left, right. It's just, everybody is, if you lined up 50 different issues, we'd be all over. Everybody would be. We don't fit into a perfect box, and so I feel like what we need right now is we need leaders that people can trust. We need leaders who are not bought off. We need leaders who can take on challenges, who are going to be honest, who have the integrity to do the job. And I'm somebody that I make. I always tell people I was an independent for many years because I'm somebody that really believes in America, and I always believed in the goods of all Americans, and the fact that we can agree on or disagree on policy issues, but still have it in our hearts that we love America and want to do what's right for Kentucky. So, that's what I would tell them. And if you're talking about voting for me, I think we need leaders who have served the country. Who've proven that they can put their country's needs above their political party front and center. I think that's what we really need right now. And frankly, we should not be having leaders in the Senate or anyone in the Senate be there for 40 years. Things like term limits are a big part of what I stand for. I stand for equal opportunity. I stand for health care. I think all Americans should have affordable and accessible health care. I think we should have good quality jobs that people don't have to have 3 jobs to make ends meet. And where do you put me on the political spectrum for wanting those things? I don't know, but I think that's what most Kentuckians want.
So some of us in the political space in Kentucky feel sort of like Lucy and Charlie Brown in that we've had candidates every so many years that take on McConnell, and the polls show they're winning, and then at the end it's, no, they didn't win. And what's coming. I mean, it's already coming, but what even more is coming, assuming you get the nomination. What makes you think that you can pull off beating Mitch when all these other people have not been able to?
Well, I think you're right to say it's a challenge, and I acknowledge that. And Kentucky is a very tough state. That said, I think people are tired of Mitch McConnell's leadership. They believe that he has left them behind, that he cares more about Washington, D.C. and the special interest than he cares about Kentucky. And I think it shows. And that is not a partisan thing to say. I mean, I can talk to the most, the biggest red Republican or conservative, and when you say, what do you think of Mitch McConnell? A lot of them say, well, yeah, of course, he works for the special interests. And so to me, you have to have a candidate who can break through that left-right, red-blue divide. And that's that's who I am. I'm a red, white, and blue kind of person. There's a lot of differences, Bruce, between myself and Mitch McConnell, right? There's age, there's political party, there's gender, there's lots of things. But you know what the biggest difference is I will work with any president, with any administration, no matter whether the president, he or she someday, wears a red jersey or a blue jersey, to do what's right for Kentucky. All right. And I think that's the biggest difference. And that's what people really want. When I talk to people who don't even know who I am, and I ask them what they want from a representative or senator, most people just want the system to work again. Let's just have the system work again. And they're not super left or right, but they want somebody that they can trust to do what's right and to get things done regardless of their political party. So I think that's a message, and that's who I am, that sort of country over party kind of candidate that can take on Mitch McConnell. That, in addition, you've got to have the resources to take him on. Look, he always wins because, for a lot of times, because he has millions more dollars than his opponents. Right. So we have to work very hard to get the resources to match him. If you don't, you just can't get there from here. So yes, it's a challenge, but I think we can do it, or I wouldn't be doing it. And I think it's really critical to get him out now more than ever.
Well, I absolutely agree with you about that. As I think the Washington Post called him, the man who broke the Senate. Whoever wins the nomination, me and Forward Kentucky are going to be fighting very hard for that person, because this is, in my opinion, it may be the most important election in the country this year, even maybe more than president. So I hope we can do that. I really do.
And hard every day to do that.
So what have I not asked you that you wish I would have asked you?
Well, I think, again, at this time, where we're all dealing with the coronavirus crisis, I think the most important thing is for fellow Kentuckians to help each other out. So, I would just like to make a plug for social distancing and for everybody to stay safe out there. And also, if you want to help and you want to be a part of this, you can go to my website, amymcgrath.com/commonhealth, and you can sign up to be a volunteer, an able-bodied volunteer, and bring supplies to somebody who needs it. This happens every day. We have hundreds of people who have signed up already and are part of this. And I would just encourage people to do that. The last time we had a crisis like this was 9/11, in my opinion. And I was in a position at that time to wear the uniform and kind of get into action. And that's kind of who I am. I'm a person of action. And so I've taken my team, and we're now working on making sure that Kentuckians get what they need right now. So if you want to be a part of that, please do. We need you.
Excellent. I always end every interview with any candidate with the same question, except I have to adjust it a little bit this time. Instead of saying you're standing on my front porch, I have to say you're standing on my virtual front porch, and you're there to speak to me. And my question is, why should I vote for you?
Well, we need better leaders in this country. We need them now. I'm somebody that has always taken on the challenges. I'm somebody who will never be bought off by special interests, that I believe in this country, and I'm willing to work hard to make sure that we have trust back in government. And, I'm somebody that puts my country above my political party. For far too long, a guy like Mitch McConnell has had power and has had influence. And not only is it something that has hurt Kentucky when you talk about his votes on health care and all the things that he's done over the course of his career. But it's also something that, people are really cynical about their government. And you see it in the generation that are in their 20s right now. And I really feel like that is going to crush us if we do not get leaders that we can count on. Again, that we can count on to be honest with us. I mean, look at what's going on right now and the total abdication of leadership of our country right now with regards to coronavirus. Look at that. I think it's we have to have better leaders, and hopefully this will drive us to change in this country and elect leaders that we can count on, who are competent, who have the background and experience to do the job, and who will put the interests of the people ahead of the interest of corporate America, of special interests and their own personal political power. I think we barely need that, and that's why I'm running.
Excellent. Amy McGrath, candidate for the Democratic nomination, out there to beat Mitch McConnell. We really appreciate you taking the time to be on the State of Kentucky, and we wish you much luck with your campaign.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, that was a learning moment for me. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Amy McGrath. And I just learned that I need to take this overlay off. So I'm going to take that off right now. We really appreciate Amy taking the time to be with us. And we look forward to talking with her again, as well as the other two candidates, Mike Breuer and Charles Booker. And with the delay in the primary, everybody's got a little more time to figure out how to campaign. So I think it's going to be an interesting time to follow. Our last interview today is with Dr. Becky Dutch. We've been looking for some time for somebody to talk to us about testing, and we haven't been able to find anybody that was willing to come on or had time to come on. And so we have another pre-recorded section that I'm going to have to fumble over and get started. But I think I found this very interesting. She's very knowledgeable about how this testing works, and she really explained things well about what the testing, why we're having trouble getting the testing. So let me jump over there real quick and load up the other recording. Give me just a second here. All right. This is it. I really apologize for the for the technical problems. This is a new thing for me doing it this way, and I'm gonna have to figure out how to do it better in the future. Okay. And here we are. And here is the video. So let me get it started. So one of the things that we have been asking ourselves for a while is, why is it so hard to get testing for COVID-19? I mean, I go down to my local doc in a box, and I can go in there and say that I think I have the flu or I think I have strep, and they can test me and have a result back in, a minute or two. And yet we seem to have this problem, not only how long it takes to get the results back, but how many tests there are. So we have been trying for a couple of weeks to get somebody who was knowledgeable enough to talk about that, to explain to us what the problem was. And today we are fortunate to have Dr. Becky Dutch from the College of Medicine at the University of Kentucky. And Dr. Dutch, welcome to the state of Kentucky.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself first. What do you do there at UK College of Medicine?
So I've been here almost 20 years. I'm the chair of the Molecular and Cellular Biochemistry Department in the College of Medicine. The vast majority of my time, other than administrative for the chair job, is research related. I also do teach. and my research looks at how viruses infect the respiratory tract and how emerging viruses come out. So I'm not a coronavirologist. This is a coronavirus we're talking about, but I do work on related viruses and have for many, many years.
Okay. So tell us exactly, I mean, we understand that the test involves swabs up the nose and so on like that, but what's the actual process of figuring out if somebody has COVID-19?
So there's two types of tests, and you're going to start hearing about both types in the news. The first are the tests they use to diagnose whether you currently have the infection. Those are the tests most people are thinking about when they want to go in and be tested. And they're tests where they look for the genetic material of the virus. So if we look at us, our genetic material, the thing that makes me Becky, is the DNA inside my cells. Coronaviruses inside that little particle we're all seeing pictures of have an RNA genome. It's a long strand of RNA that is specific to that coronavirus. So scientists could look in the sequence of that. They're going to know, but looking at it, that that's this coronavirus. So the tests that look for whether you're infected are specifically looking for that RNA. Because when we have an active infection going on, you're going to have viral particles that have viral RNA in them in your system, and more copies getting made. And there's two types of tests. The most common one, the one we're all mostly getting right now, if you have to get a test and you could get a test, is a standard test. It's called an RT-PCR reaction. Basically, they take a sample, their sample from your nose, and they break up everything so they can pull out the RNA. And then they first take that RNA and make it into DNA, and then they use something called polymerase chain reaction, or PCR. It just makes tons and tons of copies, so that eventually you can look and see if it's there. And it'll only make tons and tons of copies if it's the right piece of RNA. They basically put in the mix two things that recognize it. So you're looking for the right sequence, and only the right sequence gets boosted up. That process, when you're running the machine, would take somewhere between 2 and 6 hours, depending on how many times you had to do a cycle. So that's the more common one. There is a rapid test that is being released. I know from Abbott Labs, and I know some others are looking, which looks more like the flu test you might get in a hospital or in a doctor's office. A rapid test that looks at the RNA, but it uses a different process called isothermal amplification that can go faster. So once that comes out, and Abbott's saying they can send about 50,000 tests a day right now, which is way too little, but we got to get the numbers up. That would be more like a 10 or 15 minute test, like you would be able to do a flu test in a doctor's office. And so both are useful. The larger RT test is generally slightly more accurate, but the other one is much faster. And the goal will be to have as much as both of those on the ground as possible. So that's the tests that look for RNA. So
the 2 to 6 hour tests per test, I mean, does the machine only run one at a time?
The bigger machines can now run many at a time. So the issue is a couple-fold in terms of why we're still so slow on this. One is just it simply takes time to ramp up and get enough supplies made to be able to do these tests.
Right.
If you go online and you try to buy the equipment now to do this, everybody's getting back ordered. Because a month ago, we weren't really thinking much about testing. And so, I mean, I think the fortunate thing is we do live in a country with pretty phenomenal medical researchers, hospitals that are working on they're getting these up and going, and industry that is great. But all of these steps take a little bit of time. You can't go from having none of these to 10 million of these in a week. It takes some time. So they've been ramping up the number they can do. So for instance, I know here at UK, several weeks ago, they weren't running in-house tests. A week and a half ago, they got the first set of in-house tests up and going. They're still working on ramping those up to be able to run even more in-house tests per day. So each place is, but all of your labs, all of your industries are just ramping up how much they can do at any one time. So it's not an issue. We'll never get there. It's when we started.
So if you talk about ramping up, but you said the equipment's not available, how do you ramp up if you only have so much equipment?
So a couple things are happening. I know clinical labs the places that make all this equipment are increasing production. They're getting things out as quickly as they can. Reagents, so the different chemicals, the different, the pieces you need in that reaction, they're ramping up how many of that they make. So it's possible. It's just a matter of how quickly they can output what they need. I personally think you're going to see, if you did this, if you and I were having this talk a month from now, the state of testing in the country being completely different than it is now. And we're so much better than we were 2 weeks ago. But it's obviously we're still not where we'd like to be.
So here's the $64,000 question as far as I can see. South Korea was reported as testing 10,000 people a day, and they were ready to do that pretty quickly. Now, I have heard that that the WHO has a test, and that the CDC decided not to use their test, but came up with its own test.
That is true.
And that South Korea was prepared for this much more than we were. How much of that is accurate, and
so,
what should we have done?
So I can tell you what I might have suggested. Obviously, I'm not in the final decision making. So first, to look at South Korea. So South Korea brings several things to this that we didn't. Number one, a history of dealing with coronaviruses and a better societal understanding of how scary this could be. So first, Asia dealt with the first SARS epidemic, which was in 2002. The United States didn't have very many cases. That one had a 10% mortality rate. Thankfully, only around a little less than 10,000 cases in the world, but enough that Asia knew this could be really serious.
Mm-hmm.
South Korea in particular has had continuing cases of MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which is the second coronavirus that came out that emerged from other species. And that one has a 50% mortality rate, or pretty close to it.
Wow.
Luckily, it doesn't transmit well, so there's not a lot of cases. But a lot of the spikes in the last 5 years have been in South Korea. So they already knew this is something to be taken really seriously. And from what I can tell, as soon as the reports came out of China starting in December about this, they were getting organized for this. They already had a societal history of testing and tracking people. And so they engaged all the things they already understood what to do to be ready to face this pandemic. So that's the first thing. South Korea did a great job. I honestly think for most Americans, we haven't faced something like this. The idea that we could have an infectious disease that would shut things down like this, that could be this dangerous, we just haven't thought that way. So as a society, we were not as engaged as early. You second asked about the CDC test. From my understanding, that is correct. The World Health Organization test worked. I think there were several tests in Germany. There was a South Korean test. The CDC did design their own, and the first test kits that were sent out did not work well in the regional labs, the public health labs that were using it. So I believe, and again, this is just based on my reading and not personal experience, but I believe it was maybe 3 weeks when that was slowing us down before that got fixed. Now, I will say the science behind this is something that many places in this country can do. The basic RT-PCR reaction I could do in my own lab. It's just a matter of setting up the reagents, the different pieces correctly, so it works well for this virus.
So last question that I have, are we past the point of needing testing? I mean, are we, originally it was, well, if we could test people, we could do contact tracing and we could isolate them. And I'm wondering if we're to the point now where so many people have it and are going to get it, that testing just won't make a difference.
So I'd say no for several reasons. Number one, one of the hopes with so many shutdowns is that we will take the number of transmissions a long ways down. But when we release shutdowns, we're going to see new infections. I don't think anybody thinks that we can completely get rid of this virus in the human population. Therefore, testing and very rapid testing has become very important. So there are a lot of states, Kentucky's one of them, where our number of cases is still moderately small. I know it looks scary to us, but it's a lot smaller than many states. But if that number starts to rise, we've got to be able to test and test efficiently. So that's the first reason. We need to be able, when we go back in to do things, we also need to be able to test people more frequently. So one of the things I'm really learning over the particularly last week and a half, is that at probably somewhere between 20 and 35% of people who get this don't have symptoms. And many of us get symptoms. We get symptoms only after we've had it for probably multiple days and probably could spread the virus. So if we could get to a point when when testing was more routine, we might be able to catch people very early. Right now, we tend not to test until people are really ill. What we need to be doing is testing when people had a tiny sense that something was off. They stopped smelling, which can be a symptom for some people, or they had that first cough and they're not sure what it is. We need to test early. And then the other thing we need is another test. And this is being worked on across the country, including by industry. I know there's work going on here at UK. And the president's press secretary, one of the science specialists was talking about this last night at the press conference. We need to develop what's called a serological assay. So what I've described to you is the assay that says, do you have viral RNA in your body? What we need is a second assay that says, do you have in your system what are called antibodies? They're one of the things that our body develops once we've been sick.
Right.
Have antibodies for this virus. Because what that would mean is that you've been infected and you'd mounted a response to it. And most likely, everything we understand about viruses, at least for the next period of time, you should not be someone who's going to get sick again. So we need that test in place. That way we could be looking at the population as a whole and knowing who's already had this, because we don't know right now. If we knew that, it would really help us make decisions about what could happen in work. If you knew which healthcare workers had been exposed and gotten through it, that would give them a whole lot more confidence as they're at work. If we knew, if I knew I'd had it already, then I would know, okay, well then I'm the one going to the grocery store if my family hasn't had it, because I'm not going to get it again. So they're working on that, and I'm hoping within the month we at least have some of that, and within a few months we have it where it's much more widely available. Because then as a population, we could really understand what's going on with these infections.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your information. This has been enlightening and really helps me understand all of the details of it. So,
you're welcome.
Becky Dutch from the University of Kentucky, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. It was nice talking to you.
Well, we're very glad that we were able to have Dr. Dutch on the show. And as I said, this has been a learning experience for me, just figuring out how to do those pre-recorded sections. I'm sorry that it was a little bit unprofessional, but maybe we'll learn to do it better. We've gone a little bit long, so I just want to make a couple of points. If you have ideas, you can send them to tips@forwardky.com. If you have suggestions, if you like the show, let us know that you liked it. Obviously, this is part of our work at Forward Kentucky, so one of the things we would love for you to do is to become a member. forwardky.com/join is our membership site. And finally, we always like to show the coronavirus site to remind people of it. So if you have not checked that out, please check it out. Also on our website, we have a coronavirus page and a subscriptions and memberships page, as we are encouraging people to subscribe to their local newspapers and their local public radio stations. Again, we're on every Friday at noon. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being part of what we are doing here. We'll see you next week.
What were you doing?